My name is Fidel Beauhill. I am the Modern Man Coach. I'm a life and relationship coach for men, also known as the Kingmaker. I guess my purpose in life really is about bringing modern men and women back together again in harmony, and I do that through helping men understand themselves a lot more in relation to women.
Let's get a bit of a picture of who you are then. So, how have you come to this point? Like, where have you come from? What's your background? What would you say has been the kind of things that have shaped your idea of masculinity up until when you started this whole movement?
Wow, so
Big question,
many
appreciate
things, so many things. I guess it's a bit unfair to say that I was brought up by a single mum, but I was largely. My mum and dad separated when I was 7 years old, and I spent the majority of my time living with my mum. But my dad has been an influence in my life, so I want to kind of put that out there, and we'll talk a bit more about him and our relationship, I think, as we go on. But I think a real fundamental piece was, like, my mum is a feminist, right? She still is, and a powerful advocate for women and women's rights, and she's been quite active, like actually out there doing stuff, not just verbally but physically as well. But she had 4 sons, and I think there was always a bit of a balance between that, where I grew up being very, very aware of the issues that women face, but also connected to my sense of masculinity. I didn't particularly, it was a bit of a mixed message for sure, but my mum also was pretty careful to make sure that I felt okay with being a man. Some of the people around her and some of the women around her were less so. And I remember them feeling very uncomfortable when they used to come around the house and have their meetings and stuff like that. And when I appeared, not just as a man, but also a young black man or a young mixed race man, their stereotypes would kick in and their fears and stuff like that. And I certainly felt that in my sort of younger teens. So I think that's something that I reflect back on, and the impacts of that has played a large part as how I frame myself as the modern man and as part of the mission. Because I think it's that balance, that understanding and that empathy for women in general, and love and respect for women is really important, married into a keen positive sense of what it is to be a man and feeling positive about what masculinity is. I think that balance is really the essence of what being a modern man is.
You think of yourself as a sovereign citizen. So how do you define yourself as a sovereign citizen? What is that?
Well, I didn't put the word citizen on the end.
Oh, didn't it? Okay, so
No,
sovereign man?
a sovereign man.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
Sovereign man.
Well, because essentially I think probably being a citizen might be contradictory to being sovereign. I don't know. That's probably semantic, isn't it? Or pedantic. I think I've always felt that I've sat quite far outside of the system of society. I spent most of my formative years, sort of my teenage and right into young adulthood, making money in nefarious ways, right? I've travelled, I've moved around. I've never really kind of like plugged into society and felt like I've been part of it in any way or controlled by it. I have voted, right, which is an interesting thing. I do usually vote, so I do contribute in that way. But I've always felt like I've never done that whole 9 to 5, pay your bills, pay your taxes, be a contributor to society and stuff like that. I've always felt a bit of a rebel and a bit outside of that. And I think what made me really notice that, I suppose, was the 2 years we spent sort of in lockdown, and how that made people assess themselves and looking at the divide between people who are pro and anti and vaccinations and everything else like that. And like how little all of that stuff really affected me. I just made the choices according to my own sense of self, right? I didn't buy into either. I've never really watched the news or the media or be influenced by all of that stuff. But that doesn't mean that I don't look into important matters, right? I don't think you can be alive in the modern world and for important things to come across your consciousness. So the things that grab me, I then go and research and I look into. But I base my decisions and the way that I live my life and the way that I have brought up my children, just in ways that I see fit. But I also don't feel the need to kind of talk other people into doing the same things that I do. So I've always felt quite sovereign. It's very important to see the difference between being a sovereign and being a lone wolf, right? Those are two separate things to me. One is fairly healthy and the other one isn't. Sort of disassociating from other people around you and your community, and all of those sort of things isn't healthy. We're pack animals as human beings. You know, we're designed to integrate with each other and be part of a community. But so sovereign is being able to do that whilst still living in your integrity and doing what you think is right and living the way that you feel like you should live.
Well, I find it's quite interesting the way you say that it's not about contributing to society, and yet what you do could be argued is quite heavily contributory towards society.
Yeah,
it's almost like, I think maybe it's about being anti-authoritarian rather than being,
for sure.
And that's not just necessarily authoritarian from government.
Yeah.
That's like you brought the the vax anti-vax thing. A lot of that was people trying to be an authority on it.
Correct.
From both sides.
Correct.
And it's so it's interesting. I thought I'd ask you about it just because
it's a great question, and I think you're right. And again, it's what we mean by society. I guess I'm looking at society as what we're told it is, and I'm using a word called community, right? And community is about supporting the people. Society is the structure to me.
Yeah.
So I think what I do is for the community. Rather than the structure, rather than that. I'm trying to influence it for sure, but by helping the community become healthier and happier.
I guess for me the difference is society has class, whereas community doesn't. Like you don't in your community, you don't think of a class structure in your community, but society does impose that on you. Even
I like that.
If you don't think in terms of royalty and whatever else, there are people who are in professional, respectable jobs and people who are not. And
all of that stuff.
Yeah.
It's just nonsense. It's just it's nonsense.
So talking about being unrespectable and all that, and having an interesting
big word.
background,
Big word. I mean, respect is a massive part of how I would describe masculinity as a whole. Respect plays a huge.
So how do you define respect to you? What is respect to you?
Great question. What is respect to me? It is people. It starts with yourself, right? And it starts with taking yourself seriously, right? It's slightly different to love. It's almost a logical aspect of love, right? It does come with it a sense of authority and people thinking that you are valuable, right? And because you are, right? Because you are valuable, and people have time to listen to you and your opinions and what you think and what you say and what you bring to the world and to community. I think that's what respect is. People seeing your value on a bigger scale. Everybody has inherent value for being a human being, of course. But then some people bring value to in a communal sense at a higher level.
But you say everyone has value, but then there are definitely individuals out there who don't have value. I mean, I know it's a dangerous thing, and you can obviously jump to an extreme and say Hitler or something, which is bringing Godwin into it. But does he have value?
Did we not learn?
No. Well, let's say we learned, but could we have not just figured that out without having to kill 6 million people first? Or
we will know. We won't know, right? We certainly don't. We'd like to think so, for sure. But Hitler wasn't the first, and he probably won't be the last. He probably isn't the last, right? There's a lot of people that dispute that there's genocide still going on at the moment, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Exactly. So we have learnt, but not that much.
But I mean,
and he brought value to a lot of people around him at the time, right? I think a lot of people at the time, as individuals, learnt a lot from him. The debate as to whether that was good or bad or of net benefit, right, to the world, is it's not debatable to you or I, but there are people that will debate it with you. Yeah,
I mean, like I say, it's an extreme example, and like I wouldn't use any names because I don't think they deserve the value. But like school shooters, people like who do that kind of thing. What value do they bring?
I think that. Look, this is a real fine line, right? And if we look at that we can take it even into a personal level, right? Those individuals represent a shadow element of society, right? Of community. In the same way that no human being is perfect, right? We all have a shadow side. We all have a side that isn't great and that is capable of doing shitty things. I even talk about my own past, right? When I was younger, man, I did some shitty things. Does that mean that part of me? So even that sense of self, I work with people who carry a lot of shame and guilt around because of the former versions of themselves. Okay. And I certainly did as well, because as you grow and evolve from that, you look back and you're like, oh man, that part of me. But when we understand the environment that created that part of who you were and influenced it and the reasons why you did things, you know, we can learn from that. And I think those people represent that shadow element of a society, right? And they're the symptoms of a sick society rather than the creators of that sickness.
Give me an example of your personal experience of things that you would say are your shadow side. I mean, obviously nothing incriminating, but give me an example of something that you feel has now brought you value, whether that's just through lessons learned or how it's formed you as a person. Because you can allude to, oh, I had a dodgy past. I had a dodgy past, but I used to do stupid, dumb shit that didn't really hurt anyone on a mountain in Wales. You know? So
there are certainly people. So my main kind of source of income, probably from the age of 14 till the age of 27, was selling drugs, right? And now a lot of people, and some of those actions probably caused some harm to a few people. At the time, I didn't see it, right? At the time, I'm just providing people with a source of recreational amusement, right? But there's no doubt that people around me struggled with the drugs that I provided. And listen, on a big scale, I'm contributing to all of the horrible ways in which drugs are manufactured, imported, exported, and everything else like that. I'm part of that system, okay, which isn't good, let alone violent interactions and those sort of things that had a direct negative effect on individuals that I was involved with, for sure. But going through all of that and coming out of the other side has certainly formed who I am, right? If I was to remove those elements of my history and the stuff that I learned from that, of being a survivor, how to interact in those situations, being a certain level of confidence, a certain level of ability to communicate, you know, I wouldn't be who I am now. Like, you know, this is that bit of a weird question when people go, do you have any regrets? And they go, no, I don't have any regrets, because if I like removed any of the shit things that I did, I wouldn't be the person who I am. I find that answer a little bit glib, because I'm quite a fan of regrets. I think that shows that you've reflected on stuff and learnt from it. Regretting doesn't mean you would want to remove it from your life, but it certainly means that you have you recognize the negativity of some of those behaviors.
But I think that does quite tie into what you were saying, that regrets are almost like a shadow that you can learn from and have value from. Exactly. But that doesn't mean that they're necessarily good things. They're just, yeah. So like this, they are a symptom of a sick society. They're not necessarily the sickness. They are the thing that shows that.
So yesterday I watched a documentary, American Manhunt, the Boston bombers, right? Yeah. And this, the kind of bloodthirstiness of an entire town, or almost an entire nation, that was being brought to this young boy, right? Don't get me wrong, like what he did was atrocious, but the vitriol and the passion and the kind of witch hunt of that, just, and the volume, and we even look at the guy was in the boat, and just like the amount of police officers that were just firing willy-nilly at this boat, and ended up bullets going through people's homes and nearly killing kids. And like one of the commentators on there were like, the only reason none of these citizens were killed was luck, pure luck. And like that, for me, felt almost as toxic, right, as what this young man did, this bloodthirstiness of it. And then like they all were cheering and everything, and like had weeks of like celebrations. You think the might of the United States and the FBI and all of their kit and weapons and everything else like that, chasing this 17-year-old lad around a neighborhood, right? Trying to find him. It just, I don't know, the whole thing felt off for me, and that side felt just as off as what this young man did. And again, because what we're doing is like we're chasing a symptom, and I think the other side is actually what creates that. You know, that stuff is what, and the documentary does explore that a little bit. So how are these guys made? Like, what has, and they tried to say that it was Dagestan. This guy went on holiday to Dagestan or whatever, and that's where he got infiltrated and came back. And actually, one of the reporters, the in-depth reporters, was just like, nah, he went over there looking to be like recruited, and it didn't happen. So this stuff happened to him in the United States, and the way that society treated this young man. And this isn't about giving a guy an excuse, right, for bad behavior. There's no excuse to flipping set off bombs and blow people up. There's no excuses for that, and that's not what I'm trying to do, and that's not what the reporter I was watching was trying to do. But we do have to look into it, right? And we do have to accept some of the responsibility as a society. How are we creating people like this?
I think that there's a part of it for me that it's like what I think of as the chimp reflex. And I know there's like the whole chimp paradox thing, but I mean the chimp reflex in that if you've ever seen what chimpanzee culture is actually like, it's fucking terrifying, and it's like the darkest side of what humans can be. And I think it's whenever we allow ourselves to follow our genetic path and be more like chimpanzees, that's when the worst things come out in us. But there's a habit of us focusing everything that bugs us into icons and into individuals and into, so you know, this kid became the focus of all the hate for all the other wider problems. All gets focused into this one kid, and people forget
because we kill him and now it's solved.
And
it gives us an end game, which is it's just the wrong way of looking at it. Like I do have to be really careful in having these conversations, because I get pigeonholed all the time, because I talk in a positive way about masculinity and I'm pro men and an advocate of them. It's really easy for people to put me into a box that says that, you know, I'd be dismissive about rape, or like calling me Andrew Tate and all of this sort of stuff, which I do get called fairly regularly nowadays. Probably because I look a bit like him as well. Well, because all us mixed race dudes with bald heads and a beard look the same. But yeah, so I must be very careful not to be flippant about that sort of stuff, because it can totally get to you.
Well, you brought him up.
Oh God.
Yeah. So to what level and in what way do you think he contributes to positive and negative aspects of masculinity?
Oh,
I know. I just opened a big can of worms.
All right.
Feisty.
No. You know, I'm really comfortable with talking about the Andrew Tate phenomenon. You know, and again, like the school shooters, right? He's a symptom. He's not the problem. Like he's not. He's just somebody who's clocked the problem and is capitalizing out of it, right? Andrew Tate is a symptom rather than a cause, right? He spotted the problem, which is a large amount of men feeling totally disconnected from society, feeling kind of put upon, feeling disenchanted, and he's found a way of making money from that. You know, capitalism is the system, he's playing the game, right? And the irony of Andrew Tate and the nonsense of him as an individual is, you know, I can't believe that especially grown-up men can't see through that, the hypocrisy of it. On the one hand, producing pornography and making money from men and encouraging their addiction to that, and the let alone the misogyny and everything else of commoditizing women in order to do that as well. But because he professes to talk about being sort of pro men and pro masculinity and out there doing good for men, the hypocrisy of being financially rewarded for one of the biggest sort of poisons in the modern era for modern men, which is pornography. It causes all sorts of problems and is a really critical element to some of the problems that are going on at the moment in terms of men and women coming together. Porn's a massive part of that, and he spent many years up until probably even now. I mean, it's difficult to follow exactly where he makes his money from. I'm not going to cast aspersions I don't know the facts about, but he certainly did, and he's openly admitted that he did. On the one hand, creating all of that stuff and taking money out of men's pockets and feeding that addiction, to then coming and saying that, you shouldn't watch porn. You should buy my program instead. Essentially, he figured out, whilst all of the decades in which, or the decade or so in which he was producing porn and fleecing men from their money, and the data he got from that by being involved in really deep and meaningful conversations, right? Because these guys were really opening up to the webcam girls, and the webcam girls were having sort of really emotional conversations with them, and the data he must have got from that into really understanding his market, right, and what their fears and concerns were and what their weaknesses were and everything else like that. He was just like, well, okay, how can I tap into this market even more, right? How can I tap into this loneliness, to this sense of disassociation, to this, all of this unhappiness and loneliness and everything else like that? How else can I profit from this? And then he created his, whatever it's called, the Real World, or whatever it's called now, the Grifters Academy or something like that. It was, first of all. And he's just found another way of making money out of the same group of people, essentially.
So yeah, I find him an interesting character because
he's fascinating.
I don't think he's that smart. I just think he's that unscrupulous.
He's very unscrupulous, and also the timing, beautiful, impeccable timing. He's also like his lack of shame for putting himself on the camera and saying the things that he does. Like, he just does not care. He will do and say anything in order to make a buck.
That's the bit where I kind of wonder about his level of smartness, though, because he's massively self-snitched.
For sure.
Like, even the stuff that I know his case is ongoing and he's not innocent or guilty yet, but even the stuff that's been leaked, because the prosecution intentionally leaks stuff because they want to paint a picture before they actually put charges out, so that they can colour an opinion. But even the stuff that's leaked, the things that he himself has said, are humongous self-snitches.
Yes.
He's completely and utterly shafted himself with this stuff. And that's the bit that makes me wonder, is he just so narcissistic that he doesn't understand that he could be found guilty and actually tried and actually serve time for this? Is he so self-important that he thinks that he's never going to get caught? Is it something like that, or is he just dumb? I would suggest
because
that's the case. Because he says things
that
makes it seem like he's quite smart, because he has worked out how people think.
He has.
And as you say, it does feel like he's really worked out how to manipulate that data that he's found through years of exploiting male needs, let's say, or unmet needs.
Yeah, unmet needs, for sure.
But then he has massively self-snitched. Like, I don't see...
He has. I think they're two different kinds of intelligence, aren't they? And like you said, there's probably some personality disorder stuff going on there that's blindsiding himself against his own behaviour, that he's not seeing it, and the fact that he probably hasn't got himself surrounded by people going, dude, like, this is naughty. Most of the guys who are surrounding him aren't calling him out on that. They're all just massively profiting from it, and are agreeing with him. They're sycophants. So it's a problem. And I think, like, I had a discussion with this with one of my community members on a live video the other day, and I think the problem with him is actually there is a lot of, and the argument that people who are pro Andrew Tate would say, look, what he says some really good stuff, some stuff that's valuable, some stuff that's correct in their eyes, and that is motivating and everything else like that. And I agree with that. Like, there is quite a bunch of stuff that Andrew Tate has said that I do actually agree with. I'm like, he brings up some really valid points. The problem for me with the person is that what he said, as for me, masculinity is about that integrity, right? Do you walk your talk? Do you do what you say you do? Like, and if he promotes himself as a proponent of positive masculinity, right, of healthy masculinity, what he does is none of those things. And so I can take his words, but the vessel, the speaker, is just as important if we're going to pedestalize him. I think that's the danger. There's just no integrity there.
No. So obviously you do agree with some of his stuff. Let's pick on one of them. What is your big issue with porn then?
My big issue with porn is the way that it is. So it isn't even about watching it. So some people can watch porn. I don't say that I never have and still don't, right? I still do indulge every now and again. Like, it's the way in which it's a bit like drugs and alcohol and cigarettes and all of this. There's an addictive element to that. One of the things that I've been blessed with is a pretty non-addictive personality, right? I just never have, compared to a lot of people around me. You know, I've been involved, I've taken drugs, I've used drugs, I've and I can dip in and out of stuff, right? Quite easily. But I do accept the fact that I'm quite lucky for that. That wasn't something that I've learned, right? That is probably something that I grew up with, because when I was first mucking around with all that stuff, I was too young to have done any of those things consciously. But there are some people who don't have that. And I think, again, as the world has progressed and as the internet has grown and come about, porn, and we're just talking from the damage it's doing to men here. We're not even talking about the criminal element to it, the people trafficking, the systematic abuse of women, and all of that disgusting stuff that goes into creating it, right? At the moment, we're just talking about the dangers of what it does to men and their sense of sexuality. Might go off on a little tangent here. One of the experiences I had post divorce, and it really reminded me of what it was as a young man. So I'm mixed race, and I remember when I was a kid, even like a young teen, this expectation of black men having big cocks, right? And the difficulty I watched with myself and some of my peers, where you would almost, there's a possibility to benefit from that, what's the word, from that exaggeration, right? But if it's not true, the confidence, the what it does to your confidence, right? Your actual confidence behind the bravado. And I think porn does all sorts of stuff to mess with men's sense of sexuality within themselves, their ability, what actually is considered healthy sex, how you please women, how you interact with women in the bedroom. And modern porn at the moment, the level of violence, the level of, just, I don't know, it feels really icky, right? And I think it's a massive part of what's creating the divide between men and women. And it's also allowing men, because it's now free and in abundance and so extreme and so gratifying to so many men, it's also meaning that a lot of guys aren't using their drive and their desire and their requirement for sex to go and create and maintain a healthy relationship in order to procreate, right? Actually, they can get their rocks off just by watching porn. And so it's easy for them now to say, well, actually, we don't need women. There's a big problem over in Japan at the moment, because actually using sex workers, and even over there, they've still got a kind of geisha tradition where you can go to a bar and you can have a full girlfriend experience where you can just have a cuddle and she'll pour you a drink and she'll listen to how your day was and everything else like that and tell you all the nice things and soothe you, right? And then you can go home from work. So, and you can also via someone you're going to have sex with. So you can go and just pay for all of that as a commodity and carry on with your life without actually the complications of being in a relationship. So there's men in the Western world are now checking out of relationships at scale. The stats are quite scary. Japan is at the forefront of that because of those other bits that aren't as stigmatized as they are over here. But it's happening over here. I mean, it's like something like 30% of 18 to 30-year-old men are not actively pursuing relationships. And a similar amount haven't had sex in the last 12 months. Like, that's crazy, right? The group of men with the highest testosterone levels, right, and the highest sex drive haven't put that to practical use, for want of a better expression, right? And part of the reason for that is they're finding other ways of doing that, and porn is a big contributor to that. So yeah, that's my problem with porn. Amongst, again, like I said, the stuff that it creates and causes problems for women is.
I think it's obviously, it's like any aspect of human nature.
Mm-hmm.
It's very multifaceted, and you can't just say it's all bad, it's all good. You know, things like OnlyFans is hugely good for empowering women, but I think is hugely negative for making men go even further down that rabbit hole of fake experience.
Yeah, for sure.
You know,
and the commoditization of women. If I just pay them to do it, I get what I want. Right? That commoditization.
I think it's that thing of, because with OnlyFans, a woman can give an experience. So people pay a fortune not to have them actually perform on camera. They pay a fortune to have their time and for them to pay attention to them.
Correct.
And that's, you know, but it's good for the woman because she's then getting the majority of her money. She's not like being pimped out by somebody, or she's not being Andrew Tated.
Well, Andrew Tate does run actually a large OnlyFans agency, so it still happens. There are still men making a lot of money out of OnlyFans. Trust me.
No, for sure.
For sure, and that's the thing. I mean, we can't say porn is bad in and of itself. Like humans watching other humans have sex is like as old as humans are, right? And finding that arousing. So, right. So that in and of itself, and I think there's a lot. We must be careful when we bash porn, right? To not like pull that part into it. There's no like shaming men for wanting to watch it by saying that it's not natural, it's not masculine, it's all of these things, and you must be broken if you enjoy it. Like we've got to be really careful with that messaging, and going actually again, all of those things are symptoms of a system, like the system of porn and how it's created, and why it's created, and who it's created by, and how it's delivered, and the format is the problem. The thing in and of itself, like less so.